America's debt problem. It is serious. The national debt level has long been a source of contention in US domestic affairs. Given the amount of fiscal stimulus pumped into the US economy over the last few years, it's easy to see why so many people are becoming concerned about this issue. Unfortunately, the way debt levels get communicated to the general public is generally rather cryptic. Couple this problem with the reality that many individuals do not comprehend how the national debt level impacts their everyday lives, and you have a centerpiece for discussion. So, is America's debt problem serious to you? How can it affect you? Well, in this video, we will discuss America's debt problem and its consequences. Hello everyone! Welcome to Country Economies Explained, a media channel that allows you to find out the reasons behind the economic situations of countries. Make sure to like and subscribe. Also press the bell icon to never miss an update from us. That being said, let's begin. In the fourth quarter of 2020, the US national debt reached a new high of $27.8 trillion. That is greater than the United States' annual economic production as measured by GDP. The last time the debt to GDP ratio was this high was during the recession of 2007 to 2009. The previous occasion was in 1946, when the country got forced to pay for World War II. To calculate a country's debt to GDP ratio, divide its annual national debt by its GDP, or economic size. That should indicate a country's ability to pay its obligations, based on the number of goods or services it has produced or earned. What happens when there is a debt crisis? When a country is at risk of defaulting on its financial commitments, it gets considered to be in a real debt crisis. The first symptom is when a country discovers that it is unable to obtain a low-interest loan from a lender. Investors are anxious that the country will be unable to pay the bonds and will default on its obligations. Iceland experienced this in 2008, resulting in the country's bankruptcy. Argentina, Russia, and Mexico have all gone bankrupt due to debt defaults in recent years. While the European Union pulled Greece out of its crisis in 2010 to prevent a worsening of the situation, it has only returned a portion of the debt since then. By battling over measures to reduce debt, Democrats and Republicans in Congress have created a perennial financial crisis. Democrats blamed the Bush tax cuts for fewer tax receipts and the 2008 financial catastrophe. They called for more stimulus spending or tax cuts for consumers. The resulting increase in demand would help the economy emerge from its slump and improve GDP and tax collections. To put it another way, the US would do what it did after World War II and grow its way out of the debt dilemma. The Keynesian economic theory is the name of this method. As a result, Republicans campaigned for more tax cuts for companies, arguing that the money saved would get invested in growing and creating more employment. Supply-side economics is the name for this idea. Both sides had lost their concentration. Instead of focusing on ongoing economic expansion, they focused on debt. It's pointless to argue about whether Congress should cut taxes or raise spending until the economy is in the expansion period of the economic cycle. The most essential thing is to move quickly or to restore corporate and consumer confidence, which will help to power the economy. Both parties added to the situation by squabbling about how much expenditure should be slashed. They clashed about cuts to defense and welfare programs like Social Security and Medicare. Government expenditure should be maintained to recover from a recession. Any reduction will deplete liquidity and result in increased unemployment as a result of government layoffs. It is time to curb expenditure when the economy grows at a rate of more than 4%. To keep the economy from entering the bubble phase of the business cycle, spending cuts and tax rises will get required. What happened during the debt crisis of 2011? Congress postponed the adoption of the fiscal year 2011 budget in April 2011, almost resulting in a government shutdown. Republicans were outraged by the almost $1.3 trillion deficit, which was the second highest in the history at the time. The two sides reached an agreement on $38 billion in expenditure cutbacks, the majority of which came from programs that had not spent their money. The problem worsened a few days later. Standard & Poor's has downgraded the United States' ability to repay its debt to negative. Within 2 years, there was a 30% risk that the country's AAA S&P credit rating would be revoked. S&P was afraid that the Democrats and Republicans would be unable to agree on how to reduce the deficit. Each side planned to save $4 trillion over the next 12 years. The Bush tax cuts were set to expire at the end of 2012, according to Democrats. Congress was still debating whether or not to raise the $14.294 trillion debt ceiling in July. Many people believed that this was the most effective strategy to get the federal government to halt spending. It would therefore have no choice but to rely on incoming money to cover continuing costs. It would also devastate the economy. Millions of pensioners, for example, would lose their Social Security benefits. The Treasury Department may eventually default on its interest payments. It would result in a debt default. It's a clunky way to circumvent the traditional budgeting procedure. Surprisingly, demand for treasuries remained robust in 2011, and interest rates began to decrease in 2011 and fell to 200-year lows in 2012. Standard & Poor's downgraded the United States credit rating from AAA to AA+ in August. The stock market dropped as a result of this move. By enacting the Budget Control Act of 2011, Congress raised the debt ceiling to $16.694 trillion. Sequestration, which would cut nearly 10% of federal discretionary expenditure through the fiscal year 2021, was also threatened. The draconian reduction would get alerted if a congressional supercommittee could come up with a plan to lower the debt by $1.5 trillion. It learned it couldn't in November 2011. As a result, the debt problem crept into 2012. Let's look at the 2012 debt crisis now. Throughout the 2012 presidential campaign, the debt problem was front and center. President Barack Obama and Mitt Romney detailed two distinct solutions for addressing America's deteriorating economic health. The stock market plummeted after the election, signaling that the country was on the verge of a fiscal cliff. The Bush tax cuts expired at that time, and the sequestration spending cutbacks began. The economy was reeling in 2012 due to the uncertainty around the fiscal cliff. By adopting the American Taxpayer Relief Act, Congress was able to prevent it. The 2% payroll tax got reinstated, while the sequestration cutbacks got postponed until March 1, 2013. The fiscal cliff got avoided in 2013 thanks to the passage of a Senate measure on January 1, 2013. What effect did the coronavirus pandemic have? The Congressional Budget Office, CBO, forecasted a $900 billion deficit in 2019 as a result of government expenditure and the Trump administration's 2017 tax cuts. Due to the coronavirus pandemic in 2020, the estimates grew much more dire. The CBO projects that between 2021 and 2030, real US GDP is expected to rise at a rate of 2.6% per year. The CBO also forecasts a $2.3 trillion federal budget deficit in 2021, down $900 billion from 2020, but still the second largest since 1945. What are the options for dealing with the debt crisis? Economically, the debt situation can be solved easily, but politically it is more challenging. To begin, agree to decrease spending while also raising taxes by the same amount. Although each move reduces the deficit, in the same way, it has varied effects on economic development and job creation. Tax cuts do not help to create jobs. Cutting taxes does not need to result in big debt. Whatever decision is made, the government can make it clear what will happen, restoring trust. As a result, companies may incorporate the assumptions into their operating strategies. Second, following a recession, the government can postpone any adjustments for at least a year. This would allow the economy to recover sufficiently to expand at the 3 to 4% needed to generate employment, resulting in the requisite increase in GDP to weather any tax hikes or expenditure cuts. As a result, the debt-to-GDP ratio will be reduced sufficiently to eliminate any debt crisis. Why is it that the United States is not going bankrupt like Iceland? To deal with the financial crisis, the US government spent at least $5.1 trillion. That's more than a third of the annual output. It also raised the debt out of the United States. Although the situation was not as terrible as Iceland's, it had a similar impact on the US economy. The financial markets in the United States have lost faith. As a result, the country's economy is developing at a significantly slower pace. Is it feasible that the current economic conditions in the United States may lead to a government collapse similar to Iceland's? It's a possibility, but it's unlikely. The American economy has grown in size and resilience. Investors purchase US debt during economic downturns. They feel it is the most secure investment. The exact reverse occurred in Iceland. As lenders become more concerned, they need higher rates to compensate for their risk. The greater the rates, the higher the cost of refinancing a country's sovereign debt. It can no longer afford to keep rolling over debt and eventually default. Fears among investors become self-fulfilling. The United States was spared from this fate. Treasuries in the United States were still in high demand. That's because the United States' debt is fully guaranteed by the strength of one of the world's most powerful economies. One factor for the dollar's current strength is investor trust in US Treasuries. So what do you think now? How serious is America's debt problem? Do you think you are on the safe side of this? Drop your thoughts in the comments box below. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. If you're new here and want more videos like this one, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. That's going to wrap it up. And thank you very much for watching. In the next one, I'll see you all. Until then, peace.